The executive boardroom fell silent as Robert Wilson, CEO of Dynex Manufacturing, placed his hand on the shoulder of the young woman standing beside him. Her worn boots and calloused hands stood in stark contrast to the polished appearances of everyone else in the room. "Everyone, this is Maggie Collins," Wilson announced with unmistakable conviction. "She'll be joining our executive team effective immediately as our new head of equipment innovation." The shocked expressions of the executives only deepened when he added, "She just saved this company $10 million in 1 hour. I suggest you all take notes." Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you want more stories that touch the light within your heart, like this video, subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Welcome to In the Heartlight. Let's begin. Maggie Collins wiped the grease from her hands onto her already stained work pants as she locked up her small garage apartment on the outskirts of Millerville. The morning sun caught the Medal of Honor she kept hanging by her workbench, a reminder of a life that seemed increasingly distant. "Danny, breakfast is ready," she called out, arranging toast and eggs on the small kitchen table. Her younger brother appeared, his movements slightly uncoordinated but his smile genuine. At 22, Danny's developmental challenges meant he needed constant support that had fallen entirely to Maggie since their parents' accident 3 years ago. "Working today?" Danny asked, hopefully, digging into his breakfast. Maggie's expression tightened. "Not today, buddy. Remember Peterson's Auto closed down last month?" She didn't mention that it was the 4th shop in town to shut its doors this year alone. The manufacturing plant that had once sustained Millerville had outsourced most of its operations, leaving the town struggling. She glanced at the pile of bills on the counter. The red final notice stamps seemed to be multiplying. Her Army pension helped, but it wasn't enough. Not with Danny's special needs program being cut back due to county budget constraints. "But I'm looking," she assured him, ruffling his hair. "Something will turn up." After getting Danny settled with his caretaker, a retired neighbor who watched him for a few hours each day, Maggie headed to the small public library. The ancient computer took 5 minutes just to load the job search website. Her resume looked sparse on the screen. 6 years in the Army as a mechanical engineer specialist, 4 years at Peterson's Auto with a high school diploma and some technical certifications from her military days. No college degree. Nothing that impressed in today's market. You'd think knowing how to rebuild a transport vehicle engine under enemy fire would count for something, she muttered, scrolling through listings requiring bachelor's degrees and years of corporate experience. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard when she spotted a listing for Dynex Manufacturing, the same company whose departure had started Millerville's economic decline. They needed an equipment maintenance supervisor at their headquarters in the city, 3 hours away. The required qualifications made her heart sink. Engineering degree preferred, minimum 5 years corporate experience, team management background. Yet something about the job description caught her eye. Must be able to troubleshoot complex mechanical failures and implement innovative solutions under pressure. If there was one thing Afghanistan had taught her, it was solving mechanical problems under pressure. "You're applying for what?" Mrs. Garrett asked, eyebrows raised as she prepared Danny's lunch. "Equipment maintenance supervisor at Dynex," Maggie replied, printing her updated resume. "It's a long shot, but, honey, those corporate types don't look twice at folks like us unless they're cleaning their offices," Mrs. Garrett said gently. Maggie straightened her shoulders. "Maybe, but they need someone who can actually fix things, not just talk about fixing them. Worth a try, right?" To her astonishment, an email arrived 3 days later requesting her presence for an interview the following Monday. The salary mentioned made her eyes widen. It was triple what she'd made at the auto shop. The weekend became a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Garrett loaned her a pantsuit that had belonged to her daughter, now working in Chicago. It hung slightly loose on Maggie's frame, and the style was several years outdated, but it was the best option available. "Danny, I'm going to the city for a job interview," she explained Sunday night. "If I get it, we might need to move there." Danny's face crumpled with anxiety. "But my friends are here." "I know, buddy," she said, heart aching. "But we need this. If I get this job, you could go to that special program we saw online, the one with the art classes you liked." The bus ride to the city took 3 hours. Maggie spent it studying mechanical engineering concepts on her second-hand phone, ignoring the butterflies in her stomach. The Dynex headquarters loomed above her, 40 stories of gleaming glass and steel, a world away from Millerville's modest buildings. At reception, the sleek corporate atmosphere made her increasingly self-conscious of her scuffed shoes and drugstore makeup. The receptionist directed her to the 18th floor with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mechanical Engineering Division, Interview Group C," the woman said, handing her a visitor badge. "Group interview." The words made Maggie's heart sink. When the elevator doors opened on the 18th floor, her fears were confirmed. 7 other candidates waited in the conference room, all in impeccably tailored suits, most tapping away importantly on expensive laptops or tablets. Their confident postures and easy conversation marked them as people accustomed to this world. A young man with carefully styled hair glanced at her, then quickly looked away, barely concealing a smirk as he returned to his conversation with an elegant woman beside him. "Stanford's engineering program really prepared me for practical applications," he was saying loudly enough for everyone to hear. "My thesis on optimizing industrial equipment efficiency was actually published in the Engineering Quarterly." Maggie took a deep breath and found a seat at the far end of the table, trying to ignore the sidelong glances and whispers. She folded her hands on the table and waited, back straight, just as her staff sergeant had taught her. "Welcome to Dynex Manufacturing," announced a sharply dressed woman who introduced herself as Victoria Sanderson, Head of Human Resources. "We'll be conducting a series of assessments today to identify the best candidate for our equipment maintenance supervisor position." She gestured to 3 other interviewers beside her, all men in expensive suits who regarded the candidates with clinical detachment. "Before we begin," Victoria continued, glancing at her tablet, "I see we have an unusual addition to our candidate pool." Her eyes fixed on Maggie. "Miss Collins, I notice you don't have the engineering degree listed in our requirements. How did your application make it through our screening process?" The room fell uncomfortably silent. Maggie felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. "Ma'am, I have equivalent practical experience from my military service and civilian work." The job posting mentioned troubleshooting under pressure, which was my specialty in the Army. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "I see. Well, since you're already here, you might as well participate. Though I should mention we typically promote candidates with the appropriate educational background." The first exercise was a written test on mechanical engineering principles. Maggie worked through it methodically, recognizing most concepts from her practical experience, though the theoretical terminology sometimes eluded her. When they moved to the practical assessment, things shifted. A partially disassembled industrial conveyor system sat in the adjacent room. "This unit has multiple malfunctions," explained one of the male interviewers, Marcus Chen, technical director. "Each of you will have 15 minutes to diagnose as many issues as possible. Please document your findings without attempting repairs." The Stanford graduate, who had introduced himself as Blake Woodson, went first, confidently circling the machine and making notes on a company-provided tablet. When his time was up, he presented a detailed analysis citing 3 potential issues, using impressive technical jargon that made the interviewers nod appreciatively. One by one, the candidates took their turns. Each found similar problems, some adding minor variations to distinguish themselves. When Maggie's turn came, Victoria checked her watch impatiently. Maggie approached the machine differently. Instead of immediately circling it, she stood still, listening to the faint hum of its electric components, watching the slight vibration patterns in the frame. Then she knelt down and ran her hands along the underside of the conveyor belt, feeling for irregularities. "Miss Collins, please use the tablet to document your findings," Victoria reminded her with thinly veiled condescension. "In a moment, ma'am," Maggie replied, her focus unwavering. She continued her methodical inspection, occasionally closing her eyes as if listening for something only she could hear. The interviewers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dismissal. When her 15 minutes ended, Maggie approached the interviewers with the tablet. "The issues already identified are valid," she began, "but they're symptoms, not causes. The primary problem is a misalignment in the drive shaft that's creating harmonic vibrations throughout the system. That's causing the bearing wear others noticed, the belt misalignment, and the electrical fluctuations." Marcus Chen frowned. "That's an unusual diagnosis. What makes you think?" "The vibration pattern is distinctive," Maggie interrupted, then caught herself. "Sorry, sir. In Afghanistan, I maintained transport vehicles where similar vibrations indicated drivetrain issues. If not corrected, you'll replace bearings monthly instead of yearly, and eventually face catastrophic failure." A flash of memory surfaced, the howl of sandstorm winds, the frantic repair of a transport vehicle as her unit waited for evacuation, the lives depending on her getting it right the first time. She pushed the memory aside. The interviewers seemed unimpressed. Victoria's dismissive smile made it clear she believed Maggie was out of her depth. As they returned to the conference room, Maggie overheard Blake speaking to another candidate. "Military mechanics," he chuckled quietly. "They think every problem is solved with duct tape and WD-40. The next phase involved team problem solving. The candidates were divided into pairs to develop maintenance protocols for a new piece of equipment. Maggie was paired with Diane Wheeler, a poised woman with an engineering degree from MIT, who clearly wasn't pleased with the arrangement. "I'll handle the technical specifications," Diane said immediately. "Perhaps you could format the document?" Maggie bit back her response and nodded. As Diane worked on her portion, Maggie reviewed the equipment specifications. She noticed several practical issues that would make routine maintenance unnecessarily complicated. The access panel design requires removing 23 screws to reach components that will need weekly maintenance, she pointed out. "That's inefficient." Diane glanced up, irritation flashing across her face. "The design meets industry standards for secure component housing." "Standards aren't always practical," Maggie countered. "In the field, designs like this get modified by maintenance crews because they're too time-consuming." "This isn't a battlefield garage," Diane replied coldly. "We follow proper protocols here." As the day progressed, Maggie felt increasingly out of place. During lunch, the other candidates clustered together, sharing stories about graduate school and previous corporate positions. She sat alone, checking her phone for messages from Mrs. Garrett about Danny. When she returned from lunch, she found her work materials had been moved, and her notes were missing. Blake and another candidate fell suspiciously silent as she approached. Rather than confront them, she simply started again. The afternoon brought a surprise. Robert Wilson, CEO of Dynex, stepped into the assessment room during the final exercise. The atmosphere immediately tensed as everyone straightened their posture and brightened their expressions. Wilson was younger than Maggie had expected, perhaps early 40s, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. Unlike the others, his suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled up as if he'd been working. "Don't mind me," he said casually. "I like to see our recruitment process firsthand occasionally." Victoria immediately moved to his side, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing subtly toward the candidates. Maggie noticed her pointing in her direction, Wilson's eyebrows rising slightly in response. The final challenge was presented, a prototype assembly line robot that had been malfunctioning during testing. Each candidate would have 30 minutes to identify the problem and propose a solution. Blake went first again, producing an impressive technical analysis that had Victoria beaming. 3 more candidates followed with solid performances. When Diane finished her turn, only Maggie remained. "Miss Collins," Victoria said, checking her watch. "Let's complete this exercise quickly, shall we? I'm sure everyone's eager to conclude for the day." As Maggie approached the robot, she became aware of Wilson watching her intently. She focused on the task, blocking out everything else as she had learned to do under enemy fire. The robot was meant to perform precision welds but was consistently missing its target by 3 millimeters. A small error but significant enough to render the welds unsafe. The other candidates had suggested software recalibrations and sensor adjustments. Maggie examined the robot from different angles, then lay on her back and slid underneath its base, something none of the other candidates had done. Her cleanish pantsuit was now smudged with machine oil. Victoria sighed audibly. Marcus Chen whispered something to Wilson, who held up his hand, silencing the man mid-sentence. Maggie emerged from beneath the robot. "The issue isn't software or sensors," she said. "The mounting plate was installed with incorrect torque patterns. It's created a subtle warp in the base that affects the arm's precision." Marcus looked skeptical. "That's highly unlikely. These units are assembled under strict quality control." "Perhaps," Maggie acknowledged, "but I've seen similar issues in military drones. The torque pattern matters as much as the torque value. I can demonstrate if you'd like." Before anyone could respond, Wilson stepped forward. "Show me," he said simply. Victoria looked alarmed. "Mr. Wilson, we still have the assessment scoring to complete before." "I'm interested in Miss Collins's theory," Wilson interrupted, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for debate. "Please continue," he said to Maggie. Using a torque wrench from the nearby tool cabinet, Maggie loosened the mounting bolts and then retightened them in a specific pattern, explaining as she worked. Standard procedure tightens in a clockwise pattern, but with a base plate this thin, it creates uneven stress distribution. A cross pattern compensates for the material flex. When she finished, she stepped back. "May I test it now?" Wilson nodded, and Maggie initiated the robot's test sequence. The arm moved through its programmed motions and performed a perfect weld, precisely on target. Marcus Chen's eyes widened. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. "Interesting approach," Wilson said thoughtfully. "Where did you learn that technique?" "Afghanistan, sir," Maggie replied. "We had limited replacement parts, so we had to get creative with repairs. Our unit modified standard procedures to extend equipment life under harsh conditions." Wilson nodded slowly, studying her with new interest. "I have a proposition for all our candidates," he announced suddenly. "There's another issue we've been struggling with, a critical assembly line malfunction on the production floor that's delayed our newest product launch and is costing us nearly $1 million daily." He turned to address the entire group. "I'm offering a special opportunity. Anyone who can solve this problem will receive special consideration for the position, regardless of their performance in today's assessments." Victoria looked horrified but said nothing. Blake stepped forward immediately. "I'd be happy to demonstrate my problem-solving abilities, Mr. Wilson." "Excellent," Wilson replied. "All interested candidates will have 1 hour with the equipment. Miss Collins, would you like to participate as well?" Maggie hesitated only briefly. "Yes, sir, I would." The production floor of Dynex Manufacturing was a cathedral of modern industry, vast, gleaming, and filled with the harmonious hum of high-tech equipment. But one section stood silent, surrounded by anxious-looking engineers and technicians. A massive robotic assembly system sat dormant, its control panels displaying a cascade of error messages. Blake and 3 other candidates huddled around a computer terminal, reviewing diagnostic logs and speaking in low, technical terms. Diane stood slightly apart, methodically documenting the visible symptoms. None of them had yet approached the actual machine. Maggie headed straight for the equipment itself. A floor supervisor intercepted her. "Ma'am, we typically require protective gear and—" "It's all right, Jim," Wilson said, appearing beside them. "Miss Collins has my authorization." The supervisor nodded reluctantly and stepped aside. Maggie circled the machine slowly, taking in its overall design before focusing on specific components. It was a precision assembly system for medical devices, far more complex than anything she'd worked with before. "This has been down for 3 days," Wilson explained, walking alongside her. "Our best engineers can't identify the root cause. We've replaced sensors, recalibrated software, even swapped out entire control modules. Nothing works for more than a few minutes before the errors return." Maggie nodded, her mind already cataloging possibilities. What exactly happens when it fails? "The alignment precision drifts gradually until it exceeds tolerance parameters and triggers a safety shutdown," Wilson replied. "But the drift pattern is inconsistent." The situation reminded her of a particularly frustrating repair in Kandahar, a reconnaissance drone that would fly perfectly for 10 minutes before developing control issues. It had taken her 3 sleepless nights to discover that heat expansion was affecting a circuit board. "Has anyone checked for environmental factors?" she asked. "Temperature gradients, vibration patterns from adjacent equipment?" Wilson raised an eyebrow. "We maintain strict environmental controls in this facility. Temperature variations are less than 2 degrees. Maggie noticed Blake watching her conversation with Wilson, his expression darkening. He whispered something to Diane, who glanced over with undisguised resentment. "Mr. Wilson," Blake called out, "we believe we've identified a software timing issue in the control algorithm. With your permission, we'd like to make some adjustments." Wilson nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Woodson." As Blake and his group worked on their solution, Maggie continued her assessment. She noticed a subtle but rhythmic vibration coming through the floor, almost imperceptible, but potentially significant for equipment requiring micron-level precision. She knelt and placed her palm flat against the floor, closing her eyes to better sense the pattern. "What is directly beneath this section of the building?" she asked. Wilson looked surprised by the question. "The HVAC system for this wing, I believe." "Why? And when was the equipment issue first noticed?" 3 days ago, around 2 p.m. Maggie stood up. "Was any maintenance or modification done to the HVAC system shortly before that?" Wilson's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. He summoned the facility manager, who confirmed that they had indeed upgraded several air handlers 3 days earlier. "The new units are more powerful," the manager explained. "They're part of our efficiency initiative." Blake's team was now implementing their software solution, looking confident as they made the final adjustments. "Ready to test, Mr. Wilson," Blake announced. Wilson nodded, and they initiated the startup sequence. The machine hummed to life, performing flawlessly through its calibration routine. Blake shot a triumphant look at Maggie. "Problem solved," he declared. "It was definitely a timing issue in the—" His words died as the machine suddenly stopped, error messages flashing across the control panel. "Same failure pattern," a technician confirmed glumly. Wilson turned to Maggie. "You were suggesting something about the HVAC system?" Maggie nodded. "The vibration frequency from the new air handlers is creating a resonance effect in this part of the building. It's subtle, but for precision work at this scale, it's enough to cause alignment drift." Blake scoffed. "That's absurd. The building design accounts for vibration isolation." "For normal industrial tolerances, yes," Maggie agreed. "But your new product requires micron-level precision. The isolation system was designed for the old HVAC equipment's vibration signature, not the upgraded units." Wilson studied her for a moment. "If you're right, how do we fix it?" "2 options," Maggie replied without hesitation. "Immediate solution, modify the machine's mounting system to counter-dampen the specific frequency we're experiencing. Long-term fix, upgrade the vibration isolation between the HVAC system and this section of the building." She turned to a nearby workbench and quickly sketched a design for a modified mounting bracket with tuned mass dampers specifically calculated for the problem frequency. This would take about 2 hours to fabricate and install, she explained. It should allow you to resume production while the permanent HVAC isolation is upgraded. Wilson examined her sketch, then looked up at her with new respect in his eyes. How did you make this connection when our engineers missed it for 3 days? Maggie hesitated before answering. In Afghanistan, sir, we dealt with equipment failures daily. Often we couldn't get replacement parts, so we had to understand how systems interacted, not just the machine itself, but everything around it. When you can't replace, you adapt. The memory surfaced again. A critical communication system failing repeatedly in a forward operating base. The engineering team had replaced every component to no avail until Maggie realized that vibrations from the nearby generator were affecting the satellite alignment system. Her improvised damping solution had restored communications just before a major operation. Miss Collins, Wilson said, interrupting her thoughts, would you be willing to oversee the implementation of your solution? Blake stepped forward. Mr. Wilson, with all due respect, this theory is completely speculative. I strongly recommend we pursue the software approach with some refinements. Actually, Wilson replied, I find Miss Collins' analysis compelling. Jim, please have the fabrication team prioritize this bracket design. For the next 2 hours, Maggie worked alongside Dynex technicians to create and install her modified mounting system. The entire candidate group and several executives gathered to witness the test. Victoria stood nearby, her expression unreadable as she watched Maggie direct the installation process. When everything was ready, Maggie nodded to the control technician. Try it now. The machine came to life, moving through its precision routines with perfect accuracy. 10 minutes passed, then 20. No errors appeared. Run a full production cycle, Wilson instructed. The system performed flawlessly through a complete production sequence. When it finished, a spontaneous round of applause broke out among the technicians. Wilson turned to Maggie, extending his hand. Impressive work, Miss Collins. Behind him, Blake's face had turned an interesting shade of red. Victoria stood frozen, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. A technician approached with a printout of the performance metrics. Sir, precision values are actually better than our original specifications. We're seeing a 12% improvement in consistency. Wilson smiled. It seems we've not only fixed a problem but improved our overall process. He turned to address the entire group. Thank you all for your participation today. I believe we've found our solution and our new team member. The executive boardroom fell silent as Robert Wilson, CEO of Dynex Manufacturing, placed his hand on Maggie's shoulder. Everyone, this is Maggie Collins, Wilson announced. She'll be joining our executive team effective immediately as our new head of equipment innovation. The shocked expressions of the executives only deepened when he added, She just saved this company $10 million in 1 hour. I suggest you all take notes. Victoria stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place despite her obvious surprise. Mr. Wilson, while Miss Collins' solution was certainly creative, our hiring protocols require. Consider those protocols under review, Wilson interrupted. When was the last time anyone in this room solved a problem that's been stumping our entire engineering department for days? He turned to Maggie. Miss Collins, the position I'm offering isn't just equipment maintenance supervisor. I want you to head a new division focused on practical innovation in our manufacturing processes. Maggie blinked, momentarily speechless. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I should mention I have a younger brother with special needs. I'm his primary caretaker. That's not a problem, Wilson replied without hesitation. We have excellent flexible work arrangements and family support programs. We can discuss specifics along with your compensation package. Victoria cleared her throat. Mr. Wilson, there are considerable differences between military field repairs and corporate engineering protocols. Perhaps a transitional role would be more appropriate. A tall, distinguished man at the far end of the table spoke up. Actually, Victoria, I think Robert's instincts are spot on here. He turned to Maggie. James Harrington, Chief Operations Officer. That vibration issue has been costing us a fortune, and none of our conventionally trained engineers could see it. Maggie straightened her shoulders. Thank you for the confidence, but I want to be transparent. I don't have a degree. I've never worked in a corporate environment. What I do have is practical experience solving complex problems with limited resources. Wilson smiled. Exactly what we need. Dynex has plenty of theoretical knowledge, but we've been lacking practical innovation. Your military experience is an asset, not a liability. Blake Woodson, who had somehow managed to insert himself into the meeting, spoke up from near the door. Mr. Wilson, while I respect your decision, I feel compelled to point out that without formal engineering training, there could be serious compliance and safety concerns. Wilson regarded him coolly. Mr. Woodson, thank you for your participation in today's assessment. Victoria will discuss other suitable positions that might be available. The dismissal was polite but firm. After Blake departed, Wilson turned back to Maggie. Now, Miss Collins, let's discuss terms. I understand you currently live some distance away. Millerville, Maggie confirmed. About 3 hours by bus. Wilson nodded. We'll need to address that. Relocation assistance is standard for executive positions. As they worked through details, Maggie found herself negotiating with unexpected confidence. My brother will need to be enrolled in a special education program that meets his specific needs, and I'd like the flexibility to pursue an engineering degree while working. Done, Wilson agreed readily. Our tuition reimbursement program will cover your education costs, and our HR department can help identify appropriate programs for your brother. James Harrington leaned forward. If I may ask, Miss Collins, what drew you to apply to Dynex in the first place, especially given our complicated history with Millerville? Maggie met his gaze directly. Necessity, to be honest. But also, I've always believed in fixing things rather than abandoning them. Maybe that applies to companies and towns as well as machines. Wilson nodded thoughtfully, a perspective we've perhaps been lacking. He extended his hand again. Welcome to Dynex, Miss Collins. I have a feeling this is the beginning of a very productive relationship. As they shook hands, Victoria approached with resignation forms. I'll need your signature to process the hiring paperwork, she said, her tone professional, if not warm. Thank you, Victoria, Maggie replied, deliberately courteous. I look forward to working with your department to ensure a smooth transition. After signing the necessary documents, Wilson walked Maggie to the elevator. As they waited, he said quietly, You know, I started as a maintenance technician myself. Worked night shifts while getting my degree. Maggie looked at him with newfound understanding. That's why you recognize the practical approach. He nodded. Too many companies forget that theory without application is just an expensive piece of paper. We need people who can actually solve problems, not just talk about them. As the elevator doors opened, he added, See you Monday, Miss Collins. I suggest you wear something you can get dirty in. We have a lot of machines that need your attention. 6 months later, Maggie stood in Dynex's newly renovated fabrication facility, reviewing production metrics on her tablet. The improvements her team had implemented had increased efficiency by 32%, while reducing maintenance downtime by over half. Her new department, Practical Innovation and Engineering Solutions, had quickly become legendary within Dynex. Composed largely of veterans, vocational school graduates, and experienced technicians without traditional degrees, they approached problems with a refreshing directness that had transformed the company's operations. How's your brother settling in? Harrington asked. Danny's thriving, Maggie replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. The inclusion program you recommended has been perfect for him. He's even working part-time in the mailroom. Their conversation was interrupted by Wilson joining them. Maggie, I wanted to let you know personally, the board has approved your proposal for the Millerville facility reopening. The plan to reopen a modernized version of Dynex's original Millerville plant had been Maggie's most ambitious proposal, a project combining business sense with community revitalization. The facility would focus on specialized, high-precision components that larger factories couldn't efficiently produce. The program, now formalized as the Practical Pathways Initiative, had been inspired by Maggie's own experience. It identified candidates with non-traditional backgrounds but exceptional practical skills and provided them with targeted training and advancement opportunities. The path that had brought her here had been anything but simple or easy. Yet standing in this office, seeing the ripple effects of one desperate job application, Maggie couldn't help but feel that sometimes the most unexpected journeys led exactly where you needed to go. Did this story touch your heart? Hit that like button and subscribe to In the Heartlight for more stories that remind us what truly matters. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.